One of the stories this week, night shelter benefit change could force thousands onto the streets. The benefit rule risks closure of night shelters, forcing hundreds onto the streets. This is Patrick Butler and Nigel Bunyan in The Guardian on Wednesday. Hundreds of vulnerable homeless people face being turned out onto the streets amid confusion over how local authorities should interpret a legal ruling which triggers the closure of emergency night shelters. Some shelters which rely on housing benefit payments to fund their operations could be forced to shut after a court ruled they don't legally constitute a dwelling. Dave?
Well, I mean, it's just, I've been working in the Bear Pit in Bristol. I don't know how well you know the Bear Pit, but there's a lot of homelessness in Bristol at the moment, so I'm just seeing it on a much more localised level rather than the whole country. But I've just seen it it's getting pretty bad in Bristol. There's so much homelessness, and this is just another form of cuts that just seems to be as unnecessary as so many of the other cuts. Real people are just getting turfed out onto the streets. It's heartbreaking, actually. It's just heartbreaking.
It's really. I mean, these people are absolutely dependent, obviously, on just little bits of money. Martin, does it mean if someone is made homeless, I mean, what should they do? Or are they expected to do? Just get a job?
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter.
Oh, sorry, there are no jobs.
No, but these are the kind of people who do classically homeless people, for obvious reasons, partly because they haven't got an address, do not participate in the political process, and therefore, of course, the only way that their needs are going to be expressed is if somebody else picks up the baton for them, as it were. And, of course, we're now finding that we're being told to blame the poor for the fact that the wealthy have stolen all the money. And, of course, this is, of course, very pernicious. And this is really stupid as well, of course, because you will end up spending more money on these people one way or another. If you don't put them in the night shelter, they're going to be sleeping in the street, and then you're going to get upset about that. They're possibly going to turn to crime. You're going to need to police them or whatever. There's no rhyme or reason. A lot of this is just
I'll tell you what the rhyme and reason is. If more people you've got sleeping on the streets, it focuses the minds of everyone that's walking past them, doesn't it?
That's quite right. As Gore,
very much in your face.
As Gore Vidal said about America, he said the thing about America that people have got to realise is that the wealthy can't enjoy their wealth unless the poor suffer and are seen to suffer. And I think this kind of attitude is very much at the heart of Conservative Party thinking.
Totally
and of course it's completely wrong, and the Labour Party was set up in the first place in the 1900s to resist that kind of attitude, and they started off with one or two MPs, and they had to go from there.
Can I, Martin, can I make a point of what when you were talking about the homeless people not getting involved in the political process? I live in a van and have done for quite a long time. I'm sort of, my kind of tag, I suppose, or my social group is a bit more a traveller than anything else. But I actually ran for Mayor of Bristol from a no fixed abode. I ran as no fixed abode. I was the first person in this country who's actually run for a position of government with no address.
Was there any problem about that?
There was a little bit of, is he allowed to do that? Isn't he allowed to do that? And I kind of held my ground with it on one score, and on the other side of it, I would say that actually the council in Bristol is quite a cool council overall. They were really quite accommodating, actually. It was. Bristol's an unusual city.
How do you find it, though? I mean, if you're living in a vehicle, do you ever find yourself just settling down to sleep for the evening and then bang, bang, bang on the door?
No, not really. I find that most people are quite happy with it. I mean, it's not ideal. I do spend a lot of time outside of Bristol. I've got a caravan on a piece of land outside Bristol as well, which is I use for writing. But when I'm in Bristol, I just haven't got the money to get back. I haven't got the type of money that it costs to rent a place and be a writer at the same time without running around all the time working, when writing is my work and it just doesn't pay that well. And I have to take responsibility of that, and I don't really want to throw that onto the state if I'm not earning a load of money, and I don't want all the complications of it.
Martin?
Can I just say, what we really should be pushing for, and the Greens have been talking about this for years, and Milton Friedman, the right-wing economist in the US, originally thought of the idea, which he called negative income tax, is a citizen's income. I don't know if you remember the crass song from the 1980s, the Anarchists. Do they owe us a living? Of course they do. Of course they do. Do they owe us a living? Of course they do. And this crisis brings home, everybody in this country is entitled to a basic living, whether they work or not. And ultimately, that is where we're going to have to go to resolve the crisis.
Okay.
We're going to look after everybody. And, of course, they can work on top of that as well. It actually flexibilises the labour market. Yeah. So instead of losing benefit when you go to work, you will have your benefit and you work on top of that if you can find it.
OK, Martin. Bedroom tax has been blamed for grandmother's suicide. Grandmother who killed herself left a note in which she blamed the government for her death just days before she died. Stephanie Bottrell, 53, from Solihull in the West Midlands, told neighbours she simply could not afford to live anymore. Her family told the Sunday People she was tortured about how she would afford the £20 extra a week for the 2 under-occupied bedrooms in her home, money she owed because the government's spare-room subsidy policy, so-called bedroom tax. Mrs Bottrell died in the early hours of 4th of May. That's last week. Dave?
Well, I mean, it's heartbreaking, isn't it, to think that all these cuts are actually having a direct effect on people. And the reality is it's not just the bedroom cuts, it's just cuts on every side are coming in. But what we have to think about, because I can see that my time's coming out quite soon, is it's nearly 6 o'clock, so I just like to say with the cuts and everything else like that, is to remember where your money's going. Why are they cutting it? Are they cutting money because we're running out, or are they cutting money because they are funding illegal war? Well, I believe they're funding a legal war, and so this woman, she's crying. She's committed suicide, as much because of the bedroom cuts, but also probably because she knows where that money is going to be intended to go. It's going to go on war. You know, David Cameron's doing everything he can possibly. Even after Israel just dropped 2 Hiroshima-size, supposedly clean bombs on Syria, completely illegally, David Cameron's completely supporting that whole move where we don't know how many thousands of people have died with those 2 massive bombs, completely illegal, and David Cameron's completely behind it, and he's spending all this money that's being generated through these cuts on illegal war in these countries, and that's what this is about. That's what this is all about, and that's what we've all got to stand up against these cuts on every level.
Okay, well, they were standing up a little bit on Wednesday in the House of Lords for the bedroom tax. You'll hear First Lady Quinn from Labour and Lord Freud, who's the architect of this entire policy, who is, of course, a Conservative Lord.
There is mounting evidence not only of financial hardship, but also of families and individuals coming under severe emotional pressure. And last week there was a particularly sad case reported where a tragic outcome had resulted. It seems that the warnings of many noble lords during our earlier debates on this subject are being borne out.
We are keeping a very close eye on it because the design of this is to make sure that there are responses that people can make in terms of either trading down, pulling in lodgers, looking for work. There's a behavioural response here that we're looking for people to make, but clearly we are looking for that response.
Yeah, that was Lord Freud there. Martin, what can people do if they're worried about this bedroom tax? Certainly, don't get into despair. What can people do?
Well, as you've said on previous shows, Tony, if you're in debt and you go to court, it's unlikely that a court will evict you. So a lot of this is bluff. The fact of the matter is, as Dave's pointed out, a lot of these cuts are extremely... they're killing people. I mean, there's a study that's just come out, I read about it this week, that shows that Greece used to have the lowest suicide rate in Europe, and since the crisis began, it's gone up by 60%. And people all over Europe, all over the world, are giving up. And, of course, a lot of this stuff, the bedroom tax isn't going to save any money. A lot of this is, what Lord Freud is saying there, what we're looking for is a change in their behaviour. And this just shows how far away they are from the people who are being affected by this. He imagined that somebody can get a job, or perhaps they could take in a lodger. Perhaps we could all take in each other's washing. Perhaps Lord Freud could take in somebody else's washing. Perhaps he could actually try and live on 53 quid a week himself. But, I mean, you see how vicious this is. Then instead of talking about the macroeconomic failure of the government, the fact that their policy is way out to sea, they haven't controlled the deficit, the economy's on the edge of a cliff, we talk about whether people with one extra room in their house can be made to take in a lodger. And Charles Dickens would recognise what's going on here. It's blaming the victim. by some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the country.
And on to our next story. Water cannons are on standby for summer riots. The German-made water cannons to be approved for use in mainland Britain within weeks, according to the Sunday Express. Home Secretary Theresa May is in favour of their deployment by police for the first time outside Northern Ireland amid fears of summer riots. Both the Met and Acpo, the Association of Chief Police Officers, have requested them to tackle any civil unrest caused by welfare cuts and June's G8 meeting of world leaders. The Ziegler Wasserwerfer 9000 is capable of carrying up to 9,000 litres of water. I'm not sure how many pints that is, or gallons, but anyway, 9,000 litres, or even tear gas, which can be fired at rioters at the powerful rate of 1,100 litres per second. Well, I mean, if you look at that, it lasts about an 8-second blast, and it's gone. So, anyway, Martin, the Ziegler Wasserwerfer, what do you make of this?
Well, listen, I mean, if you're going to pursue a policy of class war from the top and persecuting the people at the bottom of the pile, some people are going to commit suicide, and some young lads with testosterone running through their systems are going to take a different line, aren't they? And you could easily see a round of rioting like in 1981 or a couple of years ago kicking off. And, of course, you know, the answer to, as people in Belfast will tell you, the answer to water cannon is petrol bombs followed by car bombs, isn't it?
Dave?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm seeing this whole back to Syria again, because that's the big thing that's coming up, a country that is not invading anyone, that we've suddenly decided that they're not actually getting involved in sort of like in the main banking cartels. They're trying to break away from the US dollar. They've got to be stopped in the eyes of sort of like in the eyes of the West. They've got to be stopped. And we know that this is all building up for a summer campaign. They're trying to get everything in place, and they know there's going to be serious opposition, and they're getting the water cannons ready, aren't they?
Well, I mean, yeah, but what you've actually got is British and US Special Forces training the freedom fighters, or whatever you want to call them, inside Syria. And, of course, therefore, the British government is directly involved in fighting in Syria. Now, the Syrians aren't going to do this because they ain't stupid. But what would stop them saying, well, if you're going to plant car bombs in Damascus, here's one in Bristol, see how you like it? Now, I'm not saying they're going to do that, but you can see that the Syrian Arab army might be considering that. If you're going to put SAS boys in to plant bombs around Damascus, well, we could send somebody to plant bombs where you live. See how you like that? It's what the IRA used to call taking the war to the Brits. And the problem with the British is they want to go to war in Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Indonesia, all over the world, and then we want to come home and have a nice cup of tea. Well, never mind, eh?
Okay, well, from
true, man.
Actually, we're sticking with the Middle East, actually, with this story. First Poundbury, now Bahrain. It's our last story. Should Prince Charles really be selling town planning to despots? A deal worth £700,000 has been signed with the the Bahraini regime. Charles has been accused of using excessive force against the Bahraini regime using excessive forces against pro-democracy activists. The Prince's Foundation for Building Community signed a $700,000 agreement with the Bahraini government to advise on sustainable housing development.
Well, if you've got the British government backing the Bahraini government, which has no support from the Bahraini people, if I was a young Bahraini patriot, I would say, just as the Syrian patriots are saying, this government is evil.
This is Prince Charles.
No, I'm just talking about the Bahraini government.
Not the British
government. The Bahraini government is exactly the same as the Syrian government. The Syrian government's probably got more popular support than the Bahraini government, but Britain is supporting rebels who plant car bombs in Syria. The Bahrainis have generally been peaceful so far, but if they were to decide to plant car bombs, the obvious place to plant one is Poundbury, isn't it?
Very well Dave, what about this deal that Prince Charles is doing with the Bahraini regime, which is, they are, for example, they've arrested loads of people for criticising their king on Twitter this week.
It's an absolutely, it's as Martin says, exactly that. I mean, Martin just said it far better than I can actually say. In actual fact, your anger there that came up there, it felt totally in the centre of my heart, because I've got a lot of respect. You know, looking at Syria, we see the fact that even though it's not about Bahrain, but Syria, I don't know a lot about the Bahraini government,
okay,
but I do know.
I'm going to have to stop you there, Dave, because it's time for the Murdoch News at 6 o'clock. After the news, a bit of Bristol transport, and also looking at this forthcoming Bilderberg conference.
BCFM is an award-winning community radio station for Bristol, bringing you national news on the hour. Live from the Sky News Centre.